all aware of that. Additionally, this is a collaborative space, and we want all of you to be able to speak up, ask questions, and later be in the discussion for co-creation. However, in the beginning, we will have a short period of presentations and good practice sharing. So for that period, please mute yourselves so that there's no background noises coming through. All right. Well, there's still people joining. I will get started and officially welcome you all to this community of practice organized by FT3. Today's topic is partnerships for better patient access to the right treatment at the right time, and what does it take to make it happen in low resource settings. Right. We come here together in this community of practice to collaboratively pave the way for a future where all patients have access to the right treatment at the right time. And FT3 convenes these spaces so that champions, global champions, but also local champions can come together in a collaborative space for learning and co-creation so that we can elicit good practices and find out how to scale what works in different healthcare contexts. By joining these meetings, you come to learn from experts, good practices, and success examples as to how to enable patient access to precision medicine. You also come here to collaborate and co-create in active discussions on emerging topics around patient needs and patient access to precision medicine. And ultimately, we want to scale what works. So we want to improve patient access through replicable and scalable strategies that can be adapted to the needs of different local realities. Today, we're here to learn about innovative partnership models for patient access in low resource settings, particularly in low middle income countries. We will have two guest speakers who will talk about this topic. And then in addition to that, we will start a discussion to co-create a blueprint model for these innovative partnerships so that potentially we can find pathways to enable scalable access to biomarker testing in low resource settings. After this short introduction from my side, you will hear the keynote presentations from our partners from India and Egypt, and then we will have a time for co-creating together and ultimately some concluding remarks and next steps. It's my pleasure to introduce Prakash Singh Deo from the Lungs Alliance in India and Mohamed El Shami from the consortium in Egypt. Myself, I'm Vincent Raska. I'm an associate program director at the Synergist and speaking here on behalf of FT3. And without further ado, I will hand over to Prakash, who will give our first keynote presentation today.
Thank you, Vincent.
Sorry, Prakash. I forgot one slide. I got too excited. Just to give a little bit more context, FT3's members have pointed out that there is an opportunity to help scale precision medicine in low and middle income countries and low resource settings. And the opportunity is particularly around addressing the unequal and fragmented access to precision medicine across the globe, and understand how we can address this within different healthcare settings. Of course, in many of the low resource settings around the world, we experience high out-of-pocket costs for patients, and industry, pharmaceutical industry in particular, has resources earmarked to support patient access that cannot afford it. An innovative practice that has emerged in the past years is that industry pools their resources together in cross-company collaborations to enable patient access. Now, that is quite innovative and then requires a perspective informed by global expertise and support. And so there is an opportunity to explore this global approach more deeply to see how we can enable multidisciplinary collaboration and create multidimensional structures to deliver patient access in those resource settings. And of course, we want it to be sustainable. And so there's a question around the evidence that needs to be built along those pathways as well. Members of FT3 have suggested that there may be a role to play for FT3 as a convener and accelerator to enable global to local connections, impact and scaling of good practices. And today we'd like to dive deeper into all of those three aspects by learning from our guest speakers, but also by exploring how this approach can be brought to life and what role FT3 may play in this. And now, without being wrong, Prakash, I hand over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vincent. And it's a pleasure to be part of this meeting and to be able to share some of the work that we are continuing to do in India. As indicated, I'm Prakash Sindhu. I'm a part of the Pfizer oncology team in India. And I also see a few fellow people from the industry, especially Epson. Epson from AZ, thank you and welcome. And you will also see, since AZ is part of this program in India, you will also feel very proud about it. So India, as you know, is a very, very large country. It's the most populous country on earth, and it's quite a bit of hustle being in India. We're always going to be constrained by one, income, and two, by the amount of people that we would need to serve. That puts us at the very unique position in terms of the human resources that we have, but also at the same time, say even in cancer with a very small incidence, the numbers would be very, very high. Vincent, if you could go on to the next slide, please. As you would see, India is divided into, while the income is rising, there is a lot of the elite and the affluent which have income ranges which is in middle to higher range, comprise of only about 17% of the population. Now, this is the population that is in a position to afford treatments or a diagnosis per se, but a large chunk of the population is not in a position to afford diagnosis as well as a lot of treatments. But in respect to cancer, if you see, there are about 191 tertiary cancer centers, and these are centers of excellence in cancer which are situated, while the patients would come from all across the country. These cancer centers are situated in largely in the metros, which means that patients from all across the country would need to travel to these places, these tertiary cancer centers of excellence, to either get diagnosed of a suspected case or to continue to get treated. This not only puts the resources of the patients and their caregivers at stake, but also marks a lot of pressure on the resources of these institutions for them to be able to continue to treat these patients, because follow-up more often than not in this case becomes a challenge. Next slide, please. Now, if you would see that the pyramid that explained, but there are two extremities of healthcare situation in India. At one end, you would have a situation in which there isn't a waiting room in a primary care center and hospital, and this is a real image of a primary care center and hospital. But at the other extreme end is a place which is very, very famous for medical tourism, and patients from all across Asia Pacific and some parts of Europe visit these centers for the treatment, because it offers such facilities which not only make the treatment comfortable, but at the same time, as compared to the Western population, would be quite economical. The next slide. Now, what we did in India is that we understood that the time to act on some of it was now. And now I'll switch on to a very specific part of the presentation in which we will be talking about lung cancer. Now, lung cancer in India, if we look at the statistics in the next slide, is by virtue of the population is a large challenge. There are about 67,000 new cases which are diagnosed in 1 year. But a large chunk of them, about 70% of them, would, when diagnosed, are at the metastatic stage itself. This means that the intent for treatment of a metastatic case, and a few oncologists in this group would agree, would largely then remain palliative and extension of life. But since they're getting late diagnosed, the 5-year overall survival in these patients is only about 17%. And 57% of these patients do not have, sorry for missing, sorry for missing on the stats there, but 57% of the patients would not have would not have access to a standard of care diagnosis. What would this mean is that while they would look at a late diagnosis, they wouldn't always have an access. They wouldn't always have access to. They wouldn't always have access to standard of care rightly in standard of care rightly in the diagnostic space. But what we did in India to overcome this is, Vincent, the next slide, please. What we did in the next area is a few like-minded pharma partners came together to ensure that at least the biomarker diagnosis in India should be elevated. What this meant is that a few people, and including AZ, BMS, Roche, J&J, and Lilly, they started conversations around pooling in resources to ensure that the lung cancer diagnosis in India becomes much more widespread and ensures that everybody has equitable access to diagnosis. Now, while we started talks with many companies, ultimately it was Pfizer, AZ, and Roche who came together to build this sort of a consortium, which is now, of course, open to all other pharma companies. With a central agency in place, they ensure that they've pooled their funds, negotiated with the labs, and there were 3 labs which were earlier in the contention, which were evaluated by a panel of experts to ensure that there is parameters of turnaround time, parameter of the cost to the patient, as well as the quality of testing. And these labs were, of course, backed by either Illumina or Thermo Fisher. So people coming together and one willing to pool those funds together to ensure that there is more and more testing. But because the pharma partners came together, and we realized that in India, all of these pharma partners in their some or the other capacity were already doing supporting some testing. What helped is pooling of the resources together gives much more advantage of ensuring that the cost of the test goes down, at the same time have better negotiating power in terms of the quality that we would want to dictate, and also standardization of these tests. Now, these tests, of course, when becomes available to everyone, this will be standardized throughout the country. There would be still be many other players who would continue to do that, but the scale of the project in itself would ensure that this is made available to anybody who needs it. Vincent, the next slide, please. Now, what would typically happen in such a program is that there is a physician who would, in India, the diagnostics are strictly by prescription. So a physician who prescribes a test to a patient, whichsoever lab is shortlisted, then the physician explains that this and this program, such a program is available in which the patient is going to get this test free of cost. And they would pass on the number of the coordinating lab to the patient and the caregiver. They would contact the lab, collect the sample, either in terms of the block or in terms of whichever place the tissue sample is preserved. And after doing this NGS test, they would pass on the reports of the patient to the patient and to the respective physician. Now, based on this report, the decision making, as all of you would know, becomes much more sharper. And if an actionable mutation is identified, the patient would get treated with the right standard of care. Now, licensing with the pharma companies as well as with the labs is a central agency which does this, which in case of India is called Cancer Research and Statistics Foundation. And of course, these are backed or funded. CRSF is centrally funded by, as of now, by Pfizer, AZ, and with Roche, which other companies are interested in joining. BMS, I know, has also recently joined this alliance. This alliance is called the LUNGS NGS. NGS stands for Next Generation Sequencing in India, and And today we are at the rate of about 500 tests which are being conducted every month. On the next slide, you would see as to what are the controls that were put in place to ensure such a program goes to place. One, everybody would have an equitable right to audit the central agency that is licensing or collecting the funds from pharma would also give an audited report to the pharma partners saying that the fund is utilized properly. They would also get a report of the aggregate number of tests which have been conducted. But of course, because of the data privacy laws, they wouldn't have any access to patient level information, just an aggregate of the number of tests that have been conducted. This is a non-commercial program. There is no promotion by any pharma company on this because there is no interest in any commercial gains. This is to improve testing in India. So none of either the pharma companies, any diagnostic partners don't have any commercial outcome of this program. So any the sales representative of say the diagnostic company or sales representative of the pharma companies, they don't talk about the program. Neither are they incentivized for any tests which are conducted to the program. This program is made equally available to any prescribing oncologist in India. Anybody who practices oncology and treats patients, this is made available to them equally. There is no selection bias. This is popularized through all the media, social media channels, and at all major conferences. There's a helpline which is given, and any physician who needs to get a patient tested is able to download a form and order a test for a patient. Of course, from a financial control point of view, the third-party agency, the central agency who's coordinating all these efforts, have a separate bank account to ensure that there is financial prudence. What outcome this would lead to, Vincent, on the next slide, is that as of now, we are in a position where we started getting, and this is a project that ran over 2 years for it to finally see the light of the day. We started getting people together, and there's a fair bit of animation there. And we looked at in the stage 2, we looked at ensuring that there are labs which are identified. An expert committee of top oncologists in India, along with molecular pathologists and people from labs, they reviewed these suggestions. Vincent, if you could move on with the animation. And ultimately, we looked at stage 5. There were a lot of, as you would know, pharma is governed by a lot of clearances. In at stage 5, each pharma company has their separate clearance for legal and compliance, which they thankfully did, and people came together to ensure that this project becomes a success. Now, what challenges we faced is one, because of the scale, labs were very highly interested in joining the program, but at the same time, not everybody was in a position to offer a lot of tests or specifications that we needed. So evaluation, re-evaluation, and more importantly, internal clearance, getting people together and internal clearances were a few things that took a little bit of time, but finally very, very happy and proud that the project has gone live. In the future, Vincent, the next slide. In the future, as of now, where we are just starting with the project. It's been a few months, and the uptake has been far higher than what we would have imagined. The question that comes is, how do we continue to sustain this project, right? The pharma partners would be in a position to fund a part of it. But continuing this project and ensuring that it runs year on year is something that we would want. There are two approaches that we are presently taking. One is to ensure that more and more pharma becomes a part of it, because pharma typically invest in diagnosis, and the more the number of players, the better is the fund and the pooling. Second is, we are also in talks with the government to ensure that there is some participation from the government, some partial funding from the government for this program. Of course, there is a funding that goes towards the treatment, but in ensuring that diagnostics is also funded is something that a few patient organizations and a few people from the consortium are working on. Next slide, please, Vincent. Now, the impact that we have of the program is, as we would like to classify it into threefold. One is very importantly as to what is the impact for the healthcare provider, because the physicians are ultimately who are in a position of taking that decision, ensuring that that the right treatment is provided and ordering the test. Second is also looking at what impact it would have on the patient, because very important to look at ensuring that ultimately the patient is benefited. And of course, since the pharma is funding, the impact on pharma is also what we looked at. Vincent, the next slide. On the HCP front, the healthcare providers had all of them now have equitable access to the testing facility anywhere across the geography of India. They could make one call, and the sample would be collected by the lab. Because the tests are standardized, and because there is fair amount of quality control that has been done, uh, and because the samples are pooled for NGS, as oncologists would agree, the number of samples getting in a high throughput machine is always going to be challenging. But because we are pooling these samples from all across the country, the turnaround time is as of now is about 2 weeks, but in reality they are delivering it in far shorter times. Um, More testing means more possibly targetable mutations that are available to them. And it helps improve with better therapies and the right therapy given to the patient, it improves their outcomes. More importantly, the aim is to conduct 10,000 tests, NGS tests in a year. And this data will be available to anybody who wants to do any academic research in India. Now, this provides a country-specific genome identified data that is used, and for future references, say a newer molecule is being targeted at a particular indication. This means that there would be some data which will be readily available for them. For the patients, this is testing at absolutely no cost, which would earlier would be at a much higher cost. This sometimes became a barrier to initiate treatment, but now since the testing is available at free of cost, patients can further decide on what treatment to take over a shorter period of time. Earlier, with pooling of the samples, the patients would have lesser time in which they can start the required therapy, because earlier, if the test results are not available, invariably the patients would be started on chemotherapy. This is now changing with a short turnaround time, and they can be given the right treatment. And of course, they do not need to go anywhere for the tissue collection. It is collected right at the doorstep, whether they're at the hospital or if they have the tissue block with them, and they are collected right at the doorstep. For pharma, as I earlier said, all of the companies were working already on some of the other diagnostic initiative, and they will continue to work on diagnostic initiative in some capacity. But out here, pooling of these resources meant that we were able to reach a much wider population. And of course, if a mutation driver is identified, there are future launches, we would be in a position to look at supporting more clinical studies and ensuring better therapies are available. And more diagnosis, of course, means larger pool of patients that are going to be available to seek the right treatment. So this is where we are in India with the program, and more people, more and more pharma companies join this program, and hopefully the government will also soon join this program, and this will only lead to better patient outcomes. Of course, sustainability is something that we are continuing to try to address. While this is where it is presently, but we would want this program to continue. Everybody who's joined the program has had a commitment of at least 2 years. Uh, uh, but more public and private partnerships is something that is going to lead to better outcomes. Vincent, the next slide. And that's where we are with the project, and hopefully we continue to be in a position where we are in a position to serve more patients better. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Prakash. Very, very insightful, very educating as well. Thanks for taking the time. And as mentioned in the chat, if you have questions for Prakash, please write them down and wait until we open the Q&A after Shami's presentation, who I will hand over to now.
Okay. So thank you, Vince, for the introduction, and it is really pleasure to have you. And my name is Mohammed Shami, and I am today will represent our alliance in the pharma group in Egypt. And in my presentation, I will focus only about the differences of what happening in Egypt about different than what already Prakash has elaborated in India. So if you go for next slide, please. We will start with the healthcare system overall view, very quick about the healthcare system in Egypt. So the healthcare system in Egypt, it's like 80% of the patient or the population are served by the public sector and 20% are served by the private sector. But what really interesting is when it comes to the expenditure, it's almost the vice versa. So 70% of the healthcare expenditure in Egypt are paid in the private sector and 30% only in the public sector. And here you will have like overall view about the scarcity of the resources and the overall population, what happened in Egypt. And of course, in the private sector, there is a very limited, in the public sector, it's a very limited resources, but the advanced healthcare treatment and the resources are placed in the private sector. When it comes to the oncology in Egypt, we are lucky because the president himself are launching a presidential initiative directed to the treatment of the oncology patients. They are focusing on the top four incidence oncology indication, and they are like focusing on the treatment and the testing and the awareness about the oncology in Egypt. And when it comes to the testing access, as I mentioned, it's very limited in the public sector. Most of the patients are going to the private sector in Egypt regarding to the testing. So if you go to the next slide, please. So I will talk you specifically for the lung cancer testing background in Egypt right now. So we used to have all the old like testing. I'm here like talking about the PCR, IHC, and so on. And there is a very limited NGS testing in Egypt because we don't have like any testing platform or labs making the NGS testing in Egypt. We used to like send the samples like outside Egypt in US based labs. And we have all the challenges that already mentioned by Prakash about the turnaround time and the false positive and false negative, because we don't have like the consistency of like the quality of the testing for the different labs in Egypt. But when it comes to the complexity, when it comes to a different testing mechanism from the different companies in Egypt, we used to suffer from like, because every single company or every single pharma company like serve its own mutations. So if we going for the lung cancer particularly, we used to have like every HCP go for the EGFR, for example, testing because it's the high incidence mutation when it comes to the lung cancer. But we are facing like a lot of challenges regarding if like the patient got for EGFR negative. So we have to have like rebiopsy or something like that to test the other mutation. So this is like overall view about the challenges that happened and like making us be conscious about the importance of having this kind of alliance and efforts to have the NGS testing in Egypt. So if you go for the next step. So what we are like making right now, it's like the pharma companies are making like the effort to enhance the testing environment. We are shifting towards the NGS. And of course, like the government are like seeking from all the healthcare system, like we don't have the NGS like central labs, but now we have like the government make a very huge injection of the budget to make a central labs in Egypt. We have two central labs here right now, so we have to make the NGS inside Egypt. This is will like recover or making a lot of challenges made or I mentioned earlier when it comes to like all the challenges that we are faced in the past few years. So now we are testing in NGS all the mutation. Even if we are supporting more than this kind of mutation, we are supporting like 52 genes right now when it comes to the gene mutation for the lung cancer. So we go to the next slide, please. As I mentioned, what happened from the government, which is really huge, they made the infrastructure based on the presidential initiative funds for the screening process and making the infrastructure about the testing labs. And this is like to give you an example about the effort done with, because we have, or we made already 500 like NGS in the private market in 2024 when it comes to the lung cancer only. And I know that the other pharma companies like making like around this kind of numbers from the other pharma companies. But when it comes to the next steps and the challenges that we are facing in Egypt, we are, to be like transparent, we are expanding the public sector. The ultimate objective for us or for the government, it's like to have a full access for the public sector patients to the NGS testing when it comes to the public sector patients. But it's really a huge concern about the budget allocation and the sustainability, because when it comes to Egypt, we have a tendering process every 2 to 3 years. This is where will inform the reimbursement of the treatment. And I'm here meaning that the treatment landscape may different every 2 to 3 years in Egypt. This is a very good news for us, because it is like at the end of the day, 2 to 3 years, it's not a very limited time. We can make like an agreement for 2 years. So it's doable from one side, but from other side, it's like challenging, because if the treatment landscape differ from 2 to 3 years, you may suffer from like dropping down or losing interest from one pharma companies, and it might like participate with a huge budget or something like that. And we are now like talking about how to compensate if this happen, if we like introduce with NGOs with us, like to make, even if with a certain amount of buffering for the patient, for the sake of the patient, or even like to get the government with us to like support if we have like this kind of gaps until like the other companies of like fulfill the gap. So if we go for this next slide, please. So this is the overall view right now about what we have like from the different pharma companies. The different pharma companies are like focusing on the testing and the funding part, but now we have the two central labs, which is Masri and CDC, as I mentioned, and they are now like talking about having a provider from Thermo Fisher and Illumina, because it is like we need to have the ultimate objective, as I said, to have the full accessibility of the public patients to the NGS. So hopefully we can like go further and achieve our objective. So I think this is all from my side, and I think we will have a Q&A session if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Shami. This was great, and thank you for emphasizing the differences to the alliance in India as well, to give us another view of how something like this, an innovative partnership model, can be brought to life. So I see there is a lot of questions. The chat has been active already. Please feel free to raise your hand and ask a question out loud. We are shy to speak up.
Vincent, do you want us to speak? This is Philip.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
okay.
Okay,
So
Felipe, why don't you go first, and then we hand it over to Jasper.
Absolutely. Sorry, Jasper, you put your hand up and I didn't. I was going to ask about, knowing what we know today, how could we have accelerated timelines for some of these projects? I know it takes time, there's diligence, there's multiple stakeholders, but a little bit of like a key takeaway of what could we have done differently, or what could you have done differently to speed up the impact?
Yes, and thank you for asking this. But what we now learn is that it took quite a bit of time for everyone to get together and get the project up and running. In hindsight, as I said, we would have wanted to get this up and running with maybe a smaller budget. We were looking at a 2-year window in which we would have wanted to run this for 2 years to see outcomes, but that is what took a lot of time. The evaluation of the labs also took a lot of time because there were different experts which are involved. In hindsight, these two processes, a lot of these steps can be done parallelly, which were done sequentially in India and which would have yielded a shorter time for us to start with.
Thank you, Prakash. Jasper, I know you wanted to ask a question as well.
Yeah, so thank you for all your insights. It was really interesting to hear from everyone. I wanted to ask how you brought the different pharma companies on the same table in terms of how much they are willing to share in terms of reimbursing the test. I mean, different companies may have like different um, uh, interests in terms of the prevalence of different mutations. Like in our country, EGFR is like 50%, ALK is far less common. So do they have an equal share of the test, or was it, how did it go? How did the negotiations go?
Yeah, so the way it works is that the central agency would coordinate with all of these pharma partners, and more importantly, everybody came from a viewpoint of wanting to improve patient outcomes. Does this mean that we had differences and we took time to arrive at who contributes how much? But the rule of the thumb was anybody who's spending in diagnosis and lung cancer, we're not asking anybody to provide more money. It was just redirecting of whatever resources that are being currently spent to this project. Ultimately, the outcome is similar. There is a difference in how much everybody is spending. But what we as pharma partners get to know is the cost per test, and we get to know what we have contributed. Everybody has equal right to speak about for this project. But if say there is a certain prevalence of a mutation, say you gave an example of EGFR in India is about 37%. So if there is 37% of EGFR, somebody disproportionately might there would be more patients getting diagnosed of EGFR. But that wasn't a very strict criteria of asking somebody to contribute more. It was just redirection of resources that were already being spent somewhere else to begin with.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prakash. Cash? Cash, if you're speaking, you're muted.
Sorry, thanks, Vincent. Yeah, so my question is mostly for both of you. How did you actually step up your NGS abilities in the lab throughout this process? How did you build it up? Was it with the help of diagnostic companies, pharma companies? Did you have also some foreign expertise coming in? So how did you actually do that to make sure that we're testing and getting the right results? And the second question is mostly, what do we need from pharma and diagnostic companies to bring this even further in your countries?
Thank you. Thank you for asking this. And a very important part of after people got together was to ensure that there is a quality in the testing. So what was done is that the central agency appointed a panel of experts that included oncologists, molecular pathologists, and people who work in labs in a non-profit kind of a scenario to evaluate these labs. And all labs, every lab that does NGS was asked to come was given an opportunity to come and present a proposal. This proposal included three basic things. One is the composition of the tests that they're willing to propose, the kind of testing, and we got into the very detailed technical details of whether it is an mRNA test, whether it is a DNA test, the depth of response, and The second parameter was the turnaround time. And the third parameter was, of course, the cost. Because there was synergy amongst pharma players, we were able to bring down the cost quite a bit. But the technical evaluation had to be completed. So the lab that was ultimately is onboarded for this program, and there are a couple of other backup labs as well, have agreed not only to be a part of this program at whatever cost they're doing, but also investing a part of the revenue that they would get out of this program for continuously upgrading their panels. For example, we have a 72 gene panel today, but they would further tailor it to the requirements as to how the test results would come out. They would ensure a part of that money is invested in upgrading and ensuring that the panels are further validated. On the type of labs that are there, the lab that is chosen was also part of the Illumina Accelerator program. So that means they were already uniquely positioned in terms of their quality. There's fair bit of assurance in the quality that they did, and their ability also to scale up to them. Now they're geographically present at least in 2 centers in India, and that's why collection and turnaround of time for the sample becomes short. I hope that was a answer to your question.
Thank you, Prakash. And I'm wondering, Shami, if there's something that is different in this process in Egypt that you'd like to add.
Okay, so the difference between us, it's like having the central lab is totally sponsored by the government here in Egypt. So the contribution of improving our testing platform of the government, if having the infrastructure or having the central labs, they have done 2 central labs, like to have the capacity for serving all the public sector, as I mentioned. And I think when it comes to the role of the pharma company, or the second part of the question, I think it's like very obvious that the pharma already have done a lot of effort when it comes to even the past or the past like 2 years, like to improve the testing platform, and I'm like talking with our colleagues like to make it like sustainable. So this is how we thinking to make it like sustainable for serving a patient, because we don't want to lose any patient, or we have to have like an equitable access for the NG or the testing platform in Egypt.
Thank you, Shami. Certainly a super important consideration. I will give the floor to Dorota as the last question in the interest of time. Maida, maybe you can send your question in the chat. That would be appreciated.
Thank you, Vincent, and thank you for very interesting presentations, both. I have got the question a little bit from the patient perspective, or maybe patient experience, not necessarily patient perspective. Did you collect already some data what could present how this exercise is allowing to improve patient experience during diagnostic pathway? In particular, you mentioned, Parash, about 8,000 tests per year completed already. And what I captured was also you mentioned something that tests are delivered within 2 weeks. But I'm curious also about the entire patient experience. So if you have got also some kind of observation, how does it reduce referral path for patients, how quickly patients receive the results from the test, not only that tests were delivered, some tangible data with de facto when brought together could also help to onboard more pharma companies, because it would be visible outcome on patient experience.
Thank you. Thank you for this question. Very, very insightful. The first part of this project was to ensure that it is up and running. Our aim is to do 10,000 tests in a year, but we have just started about 3-4. It's been 6 months. About 6 months back. We haven't collected data on the patient experience yet. There isn't a structured way in which this is being collected, but thank you for this insight. I would really want people to look at it, but as of now, we have not been able to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Shami, is it the same for you in Egypt?
We have like there is no like a solid data because we are still up and running, and we are like talking with the government how we make the consolidated reports for all the patients. But we have seen or witnessing the improvement of the patient journey when it comes, because I know we are now talking about the testing particularly, but we are talking all the patient journey from the early beginning, from the awareness, because we want to detect the cancer like earlier. Then when we go to the testing, we are even now like talking about how to make it like digital for the patient and even the HCP, like to get the testing results even faster, because we have the similar like turnaround time, which is 2 weeks right now, but we are like looking for all the patient journeys. So if we are talking about the very firm consolidated data, we have not yet, but we have witnessed a lot of improvement to come to the patient journey. And for the lung cancer particularly, because here in Egypt we are like detecting the lung cancer in the very late stage, where we are having some data about the early beginning or the early detection and the reflection of the testing platform or the acceleration of the testing about the results or even the quality of life of the patients.
Thank you, Shami, for sharing that as well, and thank you both, Prakash and Shami, for being here, for sharing these examples, for answering all the questions very diligently. I really appreciate that, and I really look forward to moving to the next part of the meeting, where we can enter into more in-depth discussions all together. As I said in the beginning, following the inspirational examples shared by Prakash and Shami about the alliances in India and Egypt, we are now going to try and co-create a blueprint model for these innovative partnerships to enable scalable access to biomarker testing for patients in low resource settings. For that, we will break out in 3 different groups so that we are a bit spread out and everyone can participate easily. And in all of the groups, we will address 3 pillars: partnerships, sustainability, and the first steps. And I think a lot of your questions you asked during the Q&A were already going into those directions. And so I look forward to hearing your answers to the questions in the breakout groups, and get closer to understanding what the key ingredients are that are needed to establish a blueprint for these innovative types of partnerships, and then ultimately, hopefully, come to a blueprint that can be applied in practice. So for this purpose, we will now break out in different groups, and we will use a tool called Group Map. We will share, and my colleagues will be there to help with the process, share the link in the group. You can access the link, enter your email address, and then we'll directly see the group map, where just a simple click on any of the different pillars will allow you to add a note and put your thoughts on paper there, so that it is consolidated and we can make a use of it for an outcomes report to be shared with all of you. I will stop sharing my screen now and launch the breakout groups. Okay, you should be able to see a small option in your Zoom menu that says breakout rooms, and there you can click on any of the 3 options. So we are nearing the end of the time, and we really tried to give enough space for the discussion. It was very, very rich in the group that I was in, and I hope it was the same for the others. To be respectful of your time, let's not go into much detail as to what was discussed in each group, but rather wait for the consolidated outcomes that we will share with all of you. And of course, we'll be happy to continue the conversation with everyone interested in individual follow-ups as well. We've discussed we've heard from our experts in India and Egypt about the good practice examples in terms of innovative partnership models to enable patient access in low resource settings, and then discussed what the key ingredients could be and how a partnership like that could be made sustainable, scalable, and replicable across different healthcare contexts. And for FT3 and this community, the next step then is to draft the blueprint model, consolidate the insights that you've shared, and get back to you with ideas as to how such a model could look like. Then, of course, in the long run, we would like to pressure test and further co-create this blueprint model. And our next opportunity to do so is an FT3 hosted in-person meeting in Berlin. Finally, once we get to a co-created blueprint with hopefully optional countries that could be explored for pilots, this could be taken up next year. In the meantime, I invite you all to join FT3's town hall meeting on the 10th of September at 4:30 p.m. Central European time. You're welcome to join us there and get a roadshow of everything that FT3 is working on, and the community sharing some of their impact stories with you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. It was really inspiring to listen to the examples, to your questions, and to the discussions. And I hope we can take these ideas further and create something together that will render impact and long-term change for patients.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.